Hi, team, and welcome to our first podcast for the Great Depression. We're actually going to be jumping into the New Deal and the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who will be the next president after Herbert Hoover. We're going to be discussing Herbert Hoover in class and what life is like underneath Herbert Hoover. And we're going to be doing remotely the life under FDR and then talking about these in class. So the 1932 presidential election, which will take place after electing Hoover in 1928, will be Herbert Hoover running for a second term versus FDR, who again is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Hoover is the Republican and FDR is the Democrat. When you look at the quote that we have on the board here, it says the only efforts made by Hoover to cope with the distress of unemployment were to deny its existence. FDR claims that Hoover did nothing but ignore the fact that people were struggling, that we were in the midst of an economic depression, and claims that Hoover really just had done nothing to help the people. The photo of FDR here is actually a pretty popular one. It's of him traveling in a car with Hoover on the day of his inauguration. Hoover is actually sitting next to him for them to trade positions because FDR is going to win this election in 1932. So who is FDR? He is related to Teddy Roosevelt, another famous president of the United States. He's the fifth cousin to Teddy Roosevelt. He attended Harvard and earned a degree in history. He eventually went to Columbia Law. So he's a super intelligent guy. You can see here too that he has a very strong political background. He was a VP candidate in 1920. He was Assistant Secretary of the Navy during World War I, Governor of New York. He's married to Eleanor Roosevelt, who is actually Teddy's niece. So it's a very far removed cousin, but yes, it is a cousin of the Roosevelts. One of the things that FDR is probably most recognized for is being in a wheelchair. FDR came from a rich and prominent family. He had all the things in the world that he would want, but unfortunately at the age of 29, he's going to be diagnosed with polio. It's believed that his political career would be over when he got diagnosed with polio. He's going to be in a wheelchair. It's going to be really challenging for people to respect a president who's not able to stand and move in a way that you might expect. But FDR doesn't give up. He's tenacious. He fights for what he wants, and he actually becomes president of the United States, obviously, in 1932. It's kind of an unwritten rule with the press that they will not photograph him in his wheelchair and put it out publicly in newspapers. That doesn't mean historically we don't have photos of him in his wheelchair, but he didn't want the rest of the world to view him as weak, and not that being in a wheelchair is weak, but he was afraid that by being viewed by the rest of the world as someone who's stuck in a chair, that it may change the perspective of the United States from other world leaders. So how did he get polio? Polio is a viral disease that affects the nervous system and can cause full or partial paralysis. So he was paralyzed pretty much from the waist down. They did create a support system for him, some crutches, and then also some harnesses that could help boost him out of his chair and help him also to stay standing with support with those crutches. So that way he could present and stand, and when there was something major happened, he'd be able to stand up and give his speeches. So that will become especially important to us when we start World War II and FDR is still our president. All right, so what's the debate? What's the essence of this election in 1932? It comes down to a difference of opinions on the economy. One is Hoover's beliefs. It's something known as supply-side economics. Hoover believes that we should not be giving tax cuts to anybody other than businesses. He thinks that if we provide relief to the businesses, that money then will trickle down to the workers. It'll trickle down to them in the form of letting them keep their jobs. If they have jobs, they'll be consumers, and that will help correct the economy. Roosevelt, on the other hand, believes in Keynesian economics, which is the belief that the relief should go directly to the people. We shouldn't be giving relief to the businesses. You can give that relief by reducing taxes, right? If you're taking less money out of people's paychecks, it'll be more in their pockets. If people have money in their pockets, they're more likely to spend it, becoming consumers, which will then stimulate the economy. Both of these can work. Both of them have the goal of stimulating the economy. That what's going to be most important to Americans is going to be having that money directly in their pockets and not having to rely on anybody else. So Roosevelt's philosophies of Keynesian economics and having that belief on how to run the economy is going to ultimately win out in 1932. So you can see here that the blue is the Democrats. And like we mentioned, FDR priming the pump versus Hoover, who trickled down. You can remember in 1928, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, Hoover versus Smith, it was the exact opposite, right? You can see all the red for Hoover, very small amount of votes for Al Smith, and now we see here in 1932 the exact opposite. So what is FDR up against? Something I want you to think about is maybe if you've been to Gillette Stadium for a concert, for a sporting event, you know the size. You can imagine the size. 68,756 people can fit in Gillette Stadium. There are about 120 million people in the United States. 25% of them would be 30 million. That is the number of people who do not have jobs, just straight up do not have jobs. That means the number of people who are unemployed within the United States could fill Gillette Stadium 437 times, right? I just want you to have that visual of filling that entire stadium 437 times. That's the number of people who need support and help from the American government because they are not employed due to this depression. This is a graph just to show you just what unemployment has looked like and what the trend is going to be, the impact that FDR is going to have. You're not going to see changes right away. It's going to take a little bit of time, but FDR is going to inherit the height of unemployment. By 1932 and getting into 1933, that's when we're starting to hit the 23, 24, 25% of the American public being out of work. And like we mentioned, of the 75% that remain, 3/4 of them are only working part-time. So people are in dire need of change. They're in dire need of support, and FDR is hopefully going to be coming to the rescue. All right, so we're going to stop here. I hope you have a great night.